Starting a new series on Jewish identity. And so there's this guy, he lives in Poland, right? This is in the late 19th century, and he says to his friend, you know, I'm moving to America, things aren't working out for me here. So his friend says to him, oh, that's so far away. And he says to him, far away from what? So to accentuate the idea that, you know, they were in Poland, but they're a few generations before moved from somewhere else, who moved from somewhere else, who moved from somewhere else. So as Jews, we are wandering Jews. The question is, you know, we wander from place to place. But so what does our Jewishness mean to us? We're now in America. The question is, are we Jewish Americans or are we American Jews? Now the first thing we have to do is figure out what is the difference between the two. Anyone? Jewish American or American Jew? Yeah.
Does that mean that which one you say first depends on what you believe is more potent in your life? Like, are you American more, or are you Jewish more?
So, right, so one of them is one. So which is it? So it's the noun, right? Yeah. So
No, I would say that which values come first. So probably come first your Jews values, and then because you're American, but I'm Brazilian. So first, I have different values different than you because you're American. So we look at things in a different way. But in the beginning, the root, both of us are Jews. So I mean, if you're Jews, the first values, and then you have your country values.
So it goes, very good. So it goes by the noun. So if I'm an American Jew, what does that mean? What's primary there? If I'm an American Jew. What comes first?
You're American.
American Jew. Jew comes first. American is the adjective modifying the noun that I'm a Jew who lives in America, who lives in America, right? Or a Brazilian Jew, right? But if you say I'm a Jewish American, what is that saying?
You're American first.
I'm an American, and my religion happens to be is that I'm Jewish, right? So the question is, you know, which one is Jewishness an adjective which modifies my identity, right, as an American, or is it the noun? Is it what I am? I'm a Jew who is living in America, right? So the question is, how do I define myself? And fortunately, it's not really all or nothing. And most of the times we don't have to define which one we primarily are. You know, there used to be, whenever something would happen, you know, what was the line that, you know, they'd say? Is it good for the Jews, right? Someone's elected president. Well, is it good for the Jews, right? So Jews used to look at everything through that optic of, well, is it good for the Jews? What does it mean for us, right? But times have changed. And I want to look at first an interesting period of history in terms of when we started to become Jewish Frenchmen or Jewish Americans. And that was actually in France, right? The beginning of the emancipation. The emancipation is before 1800. Jews were basically, before the American Revolution, the French Revolution, Jews were in ghettos. You couldn't have certain professions. You couldn't own land. And it's very clear that the world was kind of viewing us not as French Jews, but as, no, it's not as Jewish Frenchmen, but as French Jews. In other words, they viewed Jews as Jews who happened to live in France, but who were not going to be given too many rights. And then came the French Revolution, which was liberté, égalité, fraternité, right? Liberty, equality, and fraternity. And they said, well, equality, if we're going to give equality to the Jews, what does that mean? That means we're going to make them Frenchmen, right? And there were big debates in the French Parliament of whether Jews are going to be allowed to be citizens. In fact, in America as well, Jews were not considered citizens. I think the first one was the state of Virginia, till like 7 years after the American Revolution. It took like 7 years, and then on a federal level, I think it took like 10 or 12 years. So they said, yes, Jews are American citizens, okay? So these things were debated. And what was part of the debate? Well, part of the debate is, well, are Jews like everyone? Are Jews willing to live like everyone else? because, we have different holidays, right? Just past our holidays, people take off for Rosh Hashanah, it's the New Year, and your boss might be thinking, New Year's on December 3rd, January 1st, and they're taking off today, right? So we have different holidays and different laws, right? There's Jewish law in the Talmud, which sets down a certain ethics, which sometimes might be in conflict with the general ethics of society. So, here, pass these around. So what they did is the French Napoleon convened a group of Jewish leaders, which he actually called the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin was a body of sages. And he asked them a series of questions about, are they French Jews or Jewish Frenchmen? Okay? So the first question he asked is, the Jews born in France and treated by the law as French citizens acknowledge France as their country? Why did they feel they needed to ask that? Anyone? Why do you need to ask, is France your country? Is there any question of it?
The next one, they're going to fight for France or not?
Are you bound to defend it? Are you bound to obey the laws and follow directions of the civil code? But why are they asking this question? What other country would the Jews be?
Do they have any allegiance to the secular state, or they just consider themselves independent of it?
Well, even more than that. In the prayer book, we pray for Jerusalem, Zion, Israel. So they're asking, are you loyal to Israel and to your own? Are you a separate people, or are you Frenchmen? Right? Which leads to another interesting question. Is Judaism just a religion where you can be Jewish Americans? I'm American and I'm the Jewish religion. Or is Judaism something more than just a religion? What do you guys think? Anyone? Yeah.
It's a society, it's a community, it's people are for each other, so maybe, that's why he was asking that.
Okay, so we have it's more than just a religion. It's society, a community, or even what other word might you use? A nation. Is being Jewish a national identity? Okay.
It's not really a question when, I think it was clearly a nation wanted to be able to establish their own state, right?
Right, so now we're back in Israel,
Yeah.
and anyone who wants to can just move to Israel and you're given automatic citizenship. So if that's around, it's even more compelling to ask, well, if you're living in another country, you'd be loyal to that country. But even back then, they had a sense that Jews were praying for Zion and Israel and Jerusalem. So, and Jews were in France, but there were also Jews remember, during the wars in France, Franco-Prussian Wars, First World War, what scenario did you have? You had Jews on both sides, on the German army and the French army. What was going on? Shooting each other. Well, it's terrible, but what is the implication of that? The implication is, I'm a Jew maybe before I'm a Frenchman or a German. Because it makes sense that, would a Jew be comfortable defending France? What if there was another Jew across the other side of the trenches? Interesting question, right? But they're Germans on French, what difference? So are we just a religion or something? The other point that emphasizes, well, maybe we're more than just a religion, is what is the definition of who is Jewish?
Born of a Jewish mother.
Born of a Jewish mother, right? Now you'd say, well, you believe in Judaism, right? If it's a religion, what defines a Christian?
Believe in Jesus.
Right, or some of them have to be baptized, you may go through a ritual, believe in Jesus, and that's it. It doesn't matter if you're from Brazil or Nicaragua or Russia or, right?
That's what makes it so deep, though.
So, but that's what makes it more complicated.
Doesn't Christianity go by the Father?
That's true as well.
Islam as well.
Okay.
So what happens if you have a Jewish mother and a Christian father?
Depends who you ask, right? According to Judaism, you're Jewish, right?
Right.
The famous case of Cardinal Lustiger, the Cardinal of Paris, was Jewish. Cardinal of Paris. And he was open, he was a very sad story. He was hidden by his family in a convent at the beginning of World War II as a very young child, like 5 years old. And by the time he got out of the convent after World War II, he was 12 years old. And he grew up, that's where he grew up. And he just stayed in the church and moved up to become cardinal. And he used to say, I'm Jewish. And he was open and proud about his Jewish identity. So how can you be a cardinal of Paris and Jewish? Yes, you can. If Judaism is a national identity, like we just said, your mother's Jewish, you're born Jewish, you're Jewish. You don't have to believe in Judaism. You're a member of the tribe.
Isn't it written in Jewish writing that you can't convert even if you're going to
You can't convert out, correct?
Yeah, if you're born.
In other words, if he wanted to rejoin the Jewish community, he wouldn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
All you have to do is decide that I'm going back to the Jewish people. Okay, so question number 2. And we'll see about following the laws in the eyes of Jews or Frenchmen. In the eyes of Jews, are Frenchmen not of Jewish religion considered as brethren or as strangers? So what do we think? Are Frenchmen, are Americans, are other Americans strangers or brothers?
Strangers.
Anyone else?
I just feel like the Jews, it's like unifying bonds. It's like kind of instantaneous. You get like, I don't know where a lot of people went to college or where I went to school, like instantaneous, there's like an instant connection, as well as like reaching out to meeting other people outside your own religion. There was a certain bond where you meet people at Hillel or up at House. You would feel like an instant bond, so you feel like those are your brethren.
Maybe
Anyone
like, I
else?
don't know about here in the US.
How about
I'd say-
Brazil?
No,
Yeah.
yeah, like this, for example, in New York, probably you feel more connection with the people here. I don't know if you feel connection with the people in Texas. In Brazil, in the north, you don't feel connection. Like there are people there, I'm here, so
Right.
I don't care about them.
There's
It's
no
another-
like Brazilian national identity that we are Brazilians.
Yes, not at all. Maybe we're from Rio de Janeiro, okay, a little bit. But even in Rio de Janeiro, if you divide in neighborhoods,
But
it's
America,
here, so it's very-
America does have something, like people are proud to be
yeah, more than
Americans.
Brazil. Probably.
You know, the land of liberty, and there is a certain feeling of I'm proud to be American.
But a Jew from New York and a Jew from Texas will have a bond.
No, not the Jews. I'm talking about you.
Uh,
Non-Jews
You're
from
saying in
here,
general.
Jews from
Oh,
Texas.
in
Probably
But-
there's no
But
connection.
see, in America there is. In America,
Yeah.
even though, you know,
Yeah.
South is different, but I think all Americans feel a certain kinship because America also is more than just a geographical location. It represents certain
Liberty,
values,
freedom.
certain outlook on it. Yeah, you were talking about values before, shared
Yeah.
values. Yeah.
I think it would be the eyes of the Jews would be brethren for the French also, because like Jewish people are a nationality, so is French as a nationality in a sense. So, and then like for example, Americans. When we travel outside into like Europe and we're in another foreign country, like I'll give an example, Germany. All the Germans around, you feel like you're an outsider, an outcast there. But let's say you found another tourist of an American, you're like, ooh, my brother or my sister or whatever, and then you actually join together and you hang out.
Feels an instant connection.
So there's a
It's
connection
shared
because
culture
there's a shared
and
culture.
and language.
So is
right?
that what this is going on here?
Well, you know, I would offer is maybe, no one else says
I
that.
tried-
Maybe,
I tried
maybe,
the opposite, though.
maybe it doesn't have to be all one or another. Maybe you could say, well, you know, fellow Jew is my brethren, but it doesn't necessarily mean American has to be my stranger. Right? I may feel kinship to them that maybe it's as strong as the kinship to another Jew. Maybe it's not quite as strong, but it's still a certain kinship. And what about Russia?
Well, Russia has this quality, like we're Russians and everybody else is,
Right. So-
especially nowadays.
So Europe is very different. Now
Yeah.
Brazil is kind of like America. It's a melting pot. There's a lot of different peoples who came to Brazil. But Russia, France, England, you know, they've been there for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And so as a Jew,
As
You have
a-
to hide it, right?
Well, yeah, in most cases,
but is that because of anti-Semitism or is it just because you're not
Well,
Russian? You haven't been in
no.
Russia for 1,000 years.
No, I thought you had.
you will never know the reaction of people. It is absolutely normal to say things about different nations, even when you're sitting in a business
Coffee shop.
meeting and in a
PC has
coffee
not
shop.
come to Russia yet.
Oh, yeah. That's very sad. It's, I don't know, maybe due to, I don't know what's really going on in the world right now, but I really feel this aggression from the people. And everything-
Russia?
And especially in Russia, it's very unstabilized. And I would characterize Russian nation as very emotional and not long.
But Jews
term
fought in the
thinking.
Russian Revolution. Jews have been part of Russia for decades.
Yes, but that's what I'm talking about. Maybe times changed and certain things in the world and you know, in the air makes people think that something is different. Like Russian, it's absolutely normal to turn on TV news, the government channels. They would say that the United States is the first enemy in the world. So maybe things change.
Okay.
Where in Russia are you from?
Moscow.
What do you have to say about that?
I mean, I don't think Russia's turned for a long time.
No, when you were there, you had to hide.
Yeah, you can't talk about your Jewish.
Okay. So Europe, I think, is very different. But so back to this question. Look at number 3. What conduct does Jewish law prescribe towards Frenchmen not of Jewish religion? And then there's a question about number 6. May a Jewess marry a Christian, or may a Jew marry a Christian woman? Does Jewish law order that Jews should only marry among themselves? So he's saying, well, if you are Jewish Frenchmen, so would you marry another Frenchman? Right? Do you have to be truly an American Jew, an American who's Jewish, do you have to be able to marry another American? Is that the quality? Would that be the criterion? Or is it okay that, well, I'll only marry another Jew, but that doesn't make me less American? What do you think? Interesting question, right? You say, well, you're really American, so would you be open to being with any American? Okay. So, but let me go back to another question that was up above. What about the laws of Judaism, right? Do you have to obey different laws, or can you follow this code of the country you live, of America?
Oh,
Both?
so you're in America, you have to follow American law to be a civil citizen. At the same time, you have a code of conduct, which hopefully, in a democratic world, Jewish law will fall underneath that same kind of rule.
Wow, interesting. So you're saying, well, the two can work together.
Depending on where you live, though.
But I think that there was something here in the US that there was a Muslim, something that happened right now in the court, right? They wanted to go to the Muslim like court to decide something. The judge in the US said, no, you need to follow the American law because you're American soil. Do you know about this? It was
So there's a
few
big
months ago.
debate now about Sharia law.
Yeah, Sharia law against the
Sharia law in
It was
America.
in the news few months ago.
Sharia law in America.
And the law said, the judge said, okay, you're in American soil, doesn't matter who you are, you need to follow the American rules.
Uh-huh.
And like, she lost the case. That's correct.
Okay. What would be the Jewish outlook? We can say something on that.
Well, isn't it in Jewish law that we have to abide by the rules of the country we live in?
Okay, so flip over your sheet here. This is from the book of Jeremiah. Now, Jeremiah lived right during the period when the Babylonians conquered Israel. Jews were taken from Israel and exiled to Babylon. And Jews were living in exile, right? This was the first experience of Jews having been a nation. When we were in Egypt, we weren't really a nation yet, right? So Jewish nation. So look what it says. This is a little biblical English, but thus said the Lord of hosts, God of Israel, to the whole community which I have exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their fruit. Take wives, have children. Give your daughters to husbands. They should marry and bear children. Multiply and do not decrease. So he's saying, set up, even though you're not in Israel anymore, you should run your lives. You should be productive. And seek the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you, and pray to the Lord in its behalf. For in its prosperity you shall prosper. So what is this saying? That when you're in another country, you have to go and become part of the government that's led by the direction of the laws in that country. Now, I can't think of any examples where American law would dramatically contradict Jewish law. I have to think of what cases that might be. I think there are differences in the Good Samaritan law, right? In civil law, well, the Good Samaritan law, any lawyers here? What if you go to try and help someone and they get injured while you're trying to help them? So you're protected, right? It used to be that you were liable and then they instituted the Good Samaritan law. I think Jewish law is the same in that case as well, right? So I can't think offhand of examples that would directly contradict it, but well, look at number 12 on the French asked the Jews. 11 and 12. Does Jewish law forbid you to take usury, which is interest from one another? There's a biblical commandment that you're not supposed to take interest when you give a loan. You're not allowed to take interest when you give a loan, right? Credit cards, when they're like gouging us, right? 20%, 22%, 26%. Why do they constantly send us all this junk mail to sign up for another credit card? Why? They're hoping you'll overspend and you'll be paying these whopping interest fees, right? That's a whole industry based around it. Biblical law says you cannot take interest from another Jew. But does it allow or forbid taking interest from non-Jews? Is there a double standard? And in fact, the truth is there is. Now the irony is that Christian law, it's interesting because the Christians dropped a lot of stuff that's in the Bible, right? They dropped most of the commandments, except they set the 10 commandments you have to keep. Their version of the Sabbath is a little different than ours, but some of them do keep a certain Sabbath of sorts. So, but the one law which they kept is that a Christian cannot take interest from another Christian, either. But they can from another non-Christian. So it looks like a double standard, but they have it as well. So that would be a case where Jewish law is different than non-Jewish law, but I don't know if it would. Yeah, it might be an issue if you had a brokerage business and you're lending money to non-Jews, and then a Jew comes to ask for a loan, and you say, well, I can't give you a loan, you're a Jew. What would happen? You could sue them. They're discriminating against me because of my religion. Interesting, right? Now, all these cases of Sharia law, Jewish law, there's one thing to note. And they ask, do the rabbis have police power? In other words, can the rabbis prosecute a person if they, let's say you do charge interest to another Jew. Can the rabbis then prosecute you? So they can't, right? So the point is that the Jewish courts do not have police power today. So the only way you could follow Jewish law is if two Jews decide they're both going to accept whatever the ruling of the religious court is. And you do have that, by the way. Sometimes when the judge sends people to binding arbitration, if you're two Jewish people, you can decide, I want the rabbis, the rabbinic court to arbitrate for me. So the whole thing about Sharia that people are getting all bent out of shape is this. If they both decide and say, we're going to follow Sharia law and we'll let the Sharia court decide, then that's no problem. But what if the secular court rules one way, and then you come and say, well, according to Sharia law, I don't have to do that. Right? Or according to Jewish law. Let's say the court would rule that, your tree falls onto someone else's property, and the secular court would rule you're liable, so it's your tree. And the Jewish court might say, well, the wind blew it over, so you're not liable. What do? Do you argue religious freedom? I have religious freedom to follow Jewish law, I don't have to pay him. But the American court says you do have to pay him. What do? Interesting question, right? So that's where Sharia would be a problem. If the Muslim person is saying, well, Sharia law says I don't have to pay you, but the court said you do, and they say, well, religious freedom, I'm allowed to follow my laws. What do? So Jewish law has an interesting way to resolve.
Next question.
Look at it, yeah.
In Israel, do they follow, because I'm interested to know, does Israel, it's a Jewish state, but it's not a religious state. So
Does it follow
does
Jewish
it follow its own edicts?
Jewish law. So Israeli court system, Israeli legal system is extremely complicated.
Okay.
Because the way court systems work is they use precedent from earlier law. So you've got Turkish law, you've got English law.
They're adopting all those other laws?
Yeah, it was all brought along, apparently. And now you have what's called Mishpat Ivri, which is using Talmudic law to make it applicable to modern day situations and integrating that as well. In fact, I just saw an article that said they want to integrate more Jewish law into the legal system.
Okay.
So it isn't just a big hodgepodge.
It's a hodgepodge.
Yeah.
So there are people probably charging interest and it's not really following.
Right,
law.
and Israel is a secular state,
Right.
so it's not necessarily following Jewish law. So look what it says, number 5 on the other side. The Stei Hamed, who is interesting, a Turkish great rabbi from about the 1700s. There were great rabbis in Turkey once upon a time. Dina de Malchut Dina, which is what we just saw, the term for the law. Dina Malchut Dina means the law of the king is the law, meaning the law of the land is the law. We follow secular law. Only applies in monetary cases or criminal cases. So that's what we're saying. In monetary criminal cases, you would be obligated to follow the ruling of a secular court, even if it went against Jewish law. So if the Jewish secular court says you've got to pay this guy because your tree fell on his property, and Jewish law says you don't, Jewish law is saying you pay him because you're living in the country. But what are the exceptions? But not for ritual law. For example, secular marriage or divorce does not replace Jewish law or divorce. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you get married in a Jewish marriage, you need a Jewish get, a Jewish divorce. If you don't have it, you might have a civil divorce, but you're still married according to Jewish law. So, does not replace Jewish law or divorce just because the secular wedding or divorce is legal in that country. So that's the distinction they make. Ritual law, you follow ritual law. Criminal and monetary law, you follow American law. But let me give you another scenario. Let's say you are working for the US government, and you're in the military intelligence, and you have a high level of clearance, okay? And some documents come across your desk, and you realize from these documents that America has information that Israel is in grave danger. And the difference might be between Jewish lives being taken. That this information you have could save Jewish lives. You know about some new advanced weaponry that Israel's enemies have just developed because the American intelligence just picked it up.
Andrew's the president.
Now, the papers you signed when you started working for the American government was a pledge to keep all the information that you are getting as classified and secret and property of the American government. You're not allowed to tell anyone, according to American law and the agreement you signed. But Jews might be in grave danger. What do you do? Anyone?
James Pollard did.
I was just about to say, politics, he went to
So
jail.
this is exactly
James Pollard.
James.
Jonathan.
Jonathan, no, sorry.
This is exactly the scenario of Jonathan Pollard. So when I said before that
He's still stuck.
hopefully we are not put into the situation where I have to choose, am I American Jew or Jewish American? But what if you were in that situation? What do you do? Well, let's say you go and ask your rabbi. What does your rabbi say?
You're right.
What did we just say? We just gave a principle that said the law of the land is the law, right?
Except rituals.
Except ritual law. So this seemingly, but look at number 4. There's one other exemption, one other exception. Leviticus 18:5 says, "You shall therefore keep my laws and my rules. If a person does them, he shall live by them." So it says the Torah laws are set down to live by them. Meaning, if you're in danger for any reason, what do?
You can break the law, you can break Shabbat.
You can break the law. Well, so certainly for Jewish law, right? So if a person is ill and they need an ambulance, what do? And it's Shabbat, you're not supposed to drive a car, use a telephone. What do? You run and you call 911. It's Yom Kippur, and you get extremely deathly ill, and you have to eat something. You're diabetic, and your blood sugar tanks, and you have to eat something. And the only thing you're walking by is a McDonald's, and all they have are the bacon ham cheeseburgers. What do?
Cheese and bacon roll.
There you go, smart guy. So you eat it, obviously. So in the face of death to life, threat to one's life, the Jewish laws are suspended. Look at the next one, 4C. Maybe give this gentleman a sheet here.
And that's why Pollard did what he did.
Now they didn't.
So Pollard.
Hold on. The Babylonian Talmud, Yoma, the laws of Yom Kippur, 84b. Rescuing a child from the sea, breaking apart a wall that collapsed on a child, breaking down a door about to close on an infant, extinguishing in fire to save a life. All of these things are permitted on Shabbat, even on Yom Kippur, right? The laws are suspended. So, if the laws are suspended, what does that mean? That means that the Jewish law telling me I have to follow the law of the country is suspended. And what do? Seemingly, I'd be allowed to break. You can break Jewish law if a life's in danger. Seemingly, I'd be allowed to break American law if Jewish life were in danger, especially unfairly in danger. Now, apparently what Jonathan Pollard said is that America had a treaty, an agreement, to give Israel information if Israel was in danger. This makes it even more complicated. So he sees information that Israel's in danger. According to the treaty America made with Israel, they're supposed to give this information to Israel. So you see even more reason he would think, I can do this. Now, Jonathan Pollard case was an extremely complicated one because First of all, some people said he was being paid by Israel.
Fine.
So they're saying, he didn't do this because he's so righteous. He got paid. Israel bought him, right? Then he gets indicted. Okay, he pled guilty. There was a plea bargain agreement, which America did not keep up their end of the bargain. I think he was supposed to get 10 years or less. I mean, Ames, who gave up the CIA names to Russia, he ratted out his fellow CIA agents. He sold it to Russia. You know how many years he got? And I think CIA agents died because of the information. How many years did he get? 10 years, 12 years, I think. Pollard was given life sentence. He was given worse, much longer sentences than people who were spying for enemies of America, not allies. And not cases where, so then other people said that really the reason that America didn't keep up the plea bargain agreements, everyone know what a plea bargain is? It's when you go to the authorities and say, you plead guilty, you say you did this, and we'll lower your sentence. So the reason America didn't keep up their end of it was that part of the agreement was that he not talk to the press. So apparently he went out and sat down with Wolf Blitzer and did a whole interview. And that really ticked off the State Department. And then they claim that there are things that we can't even know about that he did. So 26 years later, they say in November, Jonathan Pollard's going to be released. And then to even make it even more crazy, what did he do? He realized they were on to him. He ran to the Israeli consulate in Washington. What did they do? Nothing. He banging on the door, and they kept the door locked. They didn't let him in. Now, if you let him in the consulate, you know he's protected by Israel. But Israel couldn't, because it would make them look even worse. They sent a guy they're paying him to spy on America, and now they're. So it was an extremely complicated case. Although it's very suspicious why he was given sentences that were longer than those given to people spying for the enemies of America. But this is the case of the person asking himself, am I an American Jew or a Jewish American? And for Jonathan Pollard, very clearly, unless you take the cynical view that he was doing it for the money, Jonathan Pollard very clearly said, I am an American Jew. I'm a Jew first and an American second. Because Jewish lives are in danger, and even though I made a pledge to the American government to say that I am working top secret information, I'm not going to reveal it, I cannot keep my pledge, and I'm going to break American law to save Jewish lives. Right? So you had to decide. So, what would you do? Anyone?
I think I'd do what Bob did.
Takes a lot of courage to do that.
Also wouldn't think I'd get 30 years though.
Even 5, 10 years. Yeah.
Even 2-3 years within itself is.
I think the real answer is you probably don't know until you're in that situation, right? Those kind of life and death situations, you know.
Did they prove that he was getting money from Israel or no?
Yeah, it was all, I mean, he admitted to it all.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, that was part of the plea bargain.
Yeah.
He admitted to it to supposedly get a lowered sentence.
Wow, they just.
And then they just
Yeah.
threw it out, ignored it.
But
They also say that and then his lawyers made mistakes. They were supposed to appeal by a certain date, a certain way, and they missed the deadline. The whole thing was like a tragedy of errors, one after the other.
Oh,
Yeah. And as I said, he went out and gave an interview when he pledged not to, and the whole thing was just really bad.
how did they find out ahead of time what he did even before the plea bargain?
How'd they find out that he was spying? I don't remember. So the Jonathan Pollard case, in a sense, is a really much more dramatic illustration of the dilemma of I'm an American Jew or a Jewish American. Now, even though we're not Jonathan Pollards, we often do come to that place of You know, am I a Jewish American Jew? I am somewhat of a, I guess, social progressive, right? More on the liberal end of, you know, the Torah says that they're poor people, you have to take care of them, and the government needs to have a, you know, a safety net for people who are impoverished. But in foreign policy, I'm much more of a hawk, because, you know, hawks tend to be much, because I think, first of all, for America, it's a better strategy, but also because of Israel, right? The American foreign policy is more aggressive and more hawkish. It's more pro-Israel, because Israel is America's lone ally in the Middle East, right? So what do I vote? Do I vote Democrat because I think, you know, we need to take care of fellow Americans, the government that'll take care of other Americans? Or do I vote Republican because I want America to be aligned with Israel? Anyone else have this dilemma?
I'll never vote Democrat again.
Okay, but I'm asking, you know, I'm not asking about how to vote. I'm asking about, in terms of, you see this dilemma, right? In terms of, do I vote, that going back to the old expression, is it good for the Jews? Right?
No, I think we have to, you know, decolonize this notion that we are Jewish Americans. You know, like in history, you look throughout history, every single time that we've assimilated into different societies, we've gone up to the top, and then slowly but surely, you know, the native population has marginalized us to the point of exile, and it's happened over and over.
What's your name?
Jonathan.
Good name. So Jonathan, but some people argue America's different. We just heard Russia, you're Jewish, they make you feel it. The people would say, America is different, America's a melting pot. You know, how many original Americans are there anyway?
That's what the German Jews thought also. The German Jews thought the same thing.
Okay.
Jews are also
crematorium.
Jews also helped build America.
What about
Chaim
the
Solomon?
Marauders?
None of the American Revolution wouldn't be possible without Chaim
Yeah,
Solomon.
but do you know that when his family came to the American government,
Yeah.
like 60 years later, and said, you know, our ancestor Chaim Solomon bankrolled the American Revolution, and the American government took loans from him, I think at the time, $300,000 in, you know, 1776. You know how much money that was back then? And his family came decades later and said, we were never paid back. You know what they said? Sorry, buddy. And they stuck some statue in Chicago somewhere. There's a statue of, I think it was Edward Morse, who was the Secretary of Finance, George Washington, and Chaim Solomon. So he's got a statue somewhere in Chicago. Thank you very much. Interesting, right? In fact, there's a famous story that Washington, you know, his troops didn't have money for coats, clothes. It was freezing in the winter. They were broke. American army was broke. The Revolutionary Army was going to fall apart because they had no more money. And the messenger came on Yom Kippur to the Two Rose Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island, and he came to the door, and Chaim Solomon, you know, saw him at the door, and people were incensed. You know, this person, non-Jewish person, walking in, he's got a gun, and he's, you know, off his horse. How do you do this? And he spoke with him. He came to the front, clapped on the thing, and he said, "Fellow Jews, George Washington needs us. The American army is destitute. Right now in Yom Kippur, we're going to make pledges." You know, maybe that's the origin of the Yom Kippur pledge. And they pledged money, and that night he collected the money, gave it to the messenger, and they sent them back off. So Jews did play a role in building America. But
I thought they weren't allowed to, they weren't recognized until 7 years later.
well, there was that was during the Revolution. There was no citizenship or not yet. Anyway.
So it was just okay.
Yeah. Well, and when they, I guess this was
Unless it was later.
it was either at the Constitutional Convention, I think, in Philadelphia. They had all the clergy people marching down. The rabbis with them, and they set up a special table with kosher food for the rabbis. You know, but some people say America's different. But you know, that was the accusation of Walt and Mearsheimer, right? This famous article written about, 4 or 5 years ago, where they basically said the Jewish lobby has too much power, and American foreign policy is being kind of railroaded by the Jewish interests and Jewish control of Congress, i.e. AIPAC, and that this should stop. It's very interesting because no one says, you know, oh, do the Chinese Americans who are lobbying America to take a stand against China in Tibet, are they are they out of line? Or, you know, the Egyptian Copts, Christians who, when Morsi took over, when the Islamic government took over Egypt for a while, they were lobbying the American government to get them to stop the persecution of Christians in Egypt. No one complained that they were lobbying the American government. Or when the Iranians are lobbying Congress to, you know, stop the trade sanctions, no one complains about that. But the Jews are lobbying, all of a sudden, it's, well, dual loyalties, right? Who are you loyal to? But what's interesting about it is that when, you know, earlier we talked about Jewish identity being a religion, but also a national identity. So we said, you know, it is also a national identity. And that's what, 200 years ago, Napoleon was asking the Jews the same thing. Like, what are you loyal to? Where are your loyalties? So, it's interesting that it came up again 200 years later. So, if I feel Israel is threatened, right, how do we view that? Is it some unfortunate incident going on 6,000 miles away? I could say tisk tisk, you know, people are dying in Syria, people are dying in Israel, or do I feel differently about that? Interesting, right? So, what makes us American Jews or Jewish Americans? Okay, where does that identity come from? What are the possibilities?
We're a nation.
Sorry?
We're a nation.
We're a nation.
We're a nation of, you know, a tribal people that live in a specific land. We're exiled from our homeland. We have customs, practices, rituals, ways of life.
Well, whoa, you're saying many different categories. So first there's nation. So according to that, if Judaism is nation, so then there is a question of can we really be loyal to America? If our ultimate nationality is if Judaism is a nationality, then you started saying way of life, customs, traditions, that's a different category, right?
Yes, but they were all supposed to be practiced and expressed in our homeland.
Okay. Anyone believe? Everyone agree with that?
Yeah, I
Any
believe it
difference?
goes.
Yeah, Johnny?
I believe it goes both ways, that yes, you are loyal to your native homeland and you should be allowed to keep and practice your customs and traditions, but when you move to a different place, it's also important that you assimilate to your new home place, because once you move to a new place, you have to assimilate just so that it could keep that country or that place unified in terms of its customs
How
and
much do you
traditions.
assimilate? That's the question. You know, after the first time I was in Israel, so I got back and I was in middle college, I get back to school, and it's Friday night, you know, it's orientation week or whatever, the week before school starts. And it's Friday night, I'm going to services, and you know, well, do I put on my yarmulke or do I not? And so for a few weeks I'd walk to synagogue, and then as I was walking to synagogue, I'd put on my yarmulke. And after a few weeks I asked myself, like, why am I doing this? Well, I don't know if I feel comfortable walking to synagogue with my yarmulke. Why not? Well, I'm kind of embarrassed. Why am I embarrassed?
Because you're not confident about your identity.
So part of it was that, you know, my Jewish identity wasn't that important to me. I'd just gone to Israel. It was starting to become more important, but I didn't really know. Part of it was that. But I think part of it is also, if you put on a yarmulke, what is it? You look different. you're distinguishing yourself as different from other people. So how far does should that assimilation go? By the way, there's a gentleman, he just passed away, who's involved in the organization as a supporter, a big supporter. And he came from a very traditional background. He used to walk, he lived on the east side. When he got married, he lived on the east side. His family lived on the west side. He used to walk Friday night back from his father's house through the park. And this was not, in 2015. This was when Central Park at night was a dangerous place. He used to walk through the park at night. But in the public sphere, as his wife said, when he was in the American Army, his close friend, who he kept in touch with for years later, he used to send him Christmas cards, never knew he was Jewish. In other words, he wouldn't do anything. He wouldn't insist on eating kosher because that made him different. He never put on a yarmulke. He would never say, it's my holiday, I can't go out on training like everyone else is doing that day, because he felt my Judaism shouldn't be on display. It shouldn't get me off from anything, and it shouldn't make me have to distinguish myself from anyone else. It's a totally private affair. But once it was a private affair, he was very dedicated to it. That was mentioned. So that's one approach. Interesting, right? So how far does that, where do you draw that line? Right?
I think eventually, the more you assimilate, the more you'll dilute whatever identity that you have.
So the slippery slope, once you say, well, I can't be too different, that line keeps moving over. So do I wear a yarmulke? If I'm a woman, do I wear a Star of David necklace? Right? What if it's dangerous? For years now, years ago I went to Paris and they said, don't wear your kippah on the metro, your yarmulke in the metro, it's dangerous. So where's that line? Am I different? Do I fit in? How do I draw that line?
I mean, isn't it individual? I mean, how everyone relates? Where do you relate to? What you relate to more?
Yes, ultimately each person has to make that own decision. Judaism, Jewish law, does give a certain direction. It says, as a general injunction, don't go in the ways of the non-Jewish world. Now, there are many different debates about what that means. Some people say it means when it's, in stark contrast. The Canaanites performed human sacrifice and had fertility rights, but then was a debauched society.
Right.
The pharaohs married their sisters.
Right.
Don't go in that way. So that's pretty clear, right? Or, if you're in certain segments of certain industries in New York, I don't want to say which, finance, whatever, people tell me you gotta do what you gotta do, right? Everyone's fudging it. I know people who try to work in compliance, forget it. If you have any integrity, forget it. Impossible. Certain areas of law, forget it, right? So don't go in their ways. You could say it means that. But one interpretation, according to Judaism, is that you should not assimilate and you should present yourself as being different from other people. And that's the source of why you go to Brooklyn, right? Take the train, get out in the middle of Borough Park, and you'll see Jews dressed in long black coats, right? Black hats, beards, except for the scene in Witness when the kid's running after, the Amish kid's running after, trying to find his mother, and he sees a big guy with a black hat and a long black coat, and he thinks it's one of his Amish fellow men. The guy turns around and he's got a payas, right? So unless you're Amish, you're not gonna distinguish any of them for being, like everyone else, and that's the basis for it. So, to don't go in their ways, one of the interpretations in the Talmud is you should look different. Sephardic Jews apparently, when they lived in the Sephardic land, they wore the jalabiya like the Arabs did, right? The long coat down to kind of night coat down to there, right? But they always had a different color or a different style or a different, make to distinguish it, right? right? When you see tourists, you see them, like you can tell they're European, right? Their jeans are cut a little differently, their sneakers aren't, have different logos, right? You can tell, like they're not American, right? Their backpack's not a Giant Sports Flex, right? You can tell, like they're dressed the same, but they're not American, right? And if you're traveling in Europe, you can tell from a mile away who's American, right? Just loud, or by the way they dress, or their style, right? Or bigger. So that's what the Jews did in Sephardic countries. They purposefully dressed with. They look for us. They look the same, but they knew we dressed different. So that's the other extreme of it. In between, like I said before, it's not all or nothing. There are where do you draw those lines, right? So that is the question. Where do you draw that line? We talked before about intermarriage, If a person wants to keep their Jewish identity and pass it on, for many people that's kind of like the bottom line barometer of what makes you Jewish, although the Reconstructionist movement just voted that they were going to allow rabbinic students who are intermarried to graduate rabbinic school and become Reconstructionist rabbis. New ruling, okay? But for most people, intermarriage is the bottom line of kind of the bottom line of maintaining Jewish identity. And then beyond that, is it lox and bagels? Is it cultural Judaism? Is it synagogue on high holidays? Is it something more than that, right? And then some people feel very proud Jewishly and will wear a big chai, but not be religious at all, right? Some people's Jewish identity, pride. Other people, it's religion. So these are all kind of levels of how do I assert my Jewish identity. And at some point, me personally, my outlook is that the Torah says, pray for the welfare of the country. I feel proud to be an American. My father fought in World War II, and part of me is very proud of that and would stand up for that. But ultimately, I feel I am more an American Jew than a Jewish American. I feel my primary identity is Jewish, and that my first allegiance is to Israel. So in case you were wondering, drum roll. So I do vote usually more Republican based on the foreign policy issue, rather than Democrat based upon the more domestic issues. Right? That's how I slice and dice it, right? And different people slice and dice it different ways. So, anyone have any feedback on how you slice and dice it?
I just go for the best candidate.
Well, like when I was in college, I took a course based upon the good professors, not the top. So I go for someone competent, and it'll all work out. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. Yeah.
Is it alright to stay always the way you're at before, or do you have to become more religious to be closer with God?
So that's an interesting question. Is this something static, our Jewish identity, connection, involvement, or is it something dynamic? So next week we read in the Torah, Lech Lecha. Abraham was told, go, journey, right? So, this is for another time, but what is unique about us being Jewish? And I think the common denominator we see about Jews isn't that we're smarter, more educated, more successful, more wealthy, all these things that they're bantered about. I think for me, what distinguishing Jewish is Jews are driven to meaning. And if you're driven to meaning, then you're always searching. So Lech Lecha, you're always searching for more. So what that means, how that's going to play out, I don't know. In the spiritual realm, people say if you're not going up, you're going down. There's no just coasting, right? Because we have two sides, a higher voice and a lower voice. Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Ra, they're in battle. So if you're not aligning yourself with the good guys, you're going to fall in with the bad guys. But that's one outlook on it. That's you're asking a specific question about spiritual. We're talking about in general. Does your Jewish identity have to constantly grow? I don't know. A person could find their medium in terms of am I Jewish American Jew and work that out and maintain that.
So So if you're an American Jew, and ultimately you relate more to being Jewish, why wouldn't everyone just make Aliyah?
Oh,
Interesting question.
$1 billion question.
So there are certain exemptions for not moving to Israel. One of them is livelihood, which used to be a valid issue. It's less so today, more opportunities in Israel. One is livelihood. One is to find the right person to marry. And the other one is to study Torah. Ironically, if you cannot live your Jewish life properly in Israel, maybe you'd have to live outside of Israel, which also has changed a lot. And the one other exemption, which isn't specifically mentioned in the Talmud, is parents. I had an elderly father, I was a sole caregiver. I was going to be, he passed away a number of years ago, so, there's no question mark. It's more of an open question mark now, but that's a very good question for another whole other talk on Israel and Zionism and, are we obligated to all move to Israel if, like you say, we're American Jews and Judaism is most prominent. So, any other comments, feedback? How do you slice or dice your, what's your name? Anna.
American Jew, but with that, still, what would I, like, going back to the Jonathan Pollard question, what would I do until you're faced with that question?
Or how about then on a more basic level, like how public are you about being Jewish? Like at work, does everyone know you're Jewish? Well, sometimes that depends on one's name. Depends what your last name is, right?
I think it also depends on where you live. We live in New York, so it's here it's easier, and then here in another part of America it'd be very different. And maybe, here.
Maybe you wouldn't want to advertise it.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier when there's more Jews in New York than in Israel.
Yeah. My wife is in an industry which is not very few Jews.
Right.
And, but they're actually very respectful. I mean, they're very respectful because the corporate policy is that they have to. And pretty much are pharmaceutical sales. But it's interesting, very few Jews in the industry. And she's the exception, even though she's in New York, which is strange. So, anyone else? Okay, well, it's an ongoing process of, you say, can you be stagnant in it? So hopefully it's a journey. And as one journeys spiritually, one journeys in terms of identity and what that means to us, and something that we can be thinking about, especially today where, Israel, things are heating up, and if you have any feeling towards Israel, it's hard now to just say to be silent, because the media is so biased against Israel, and people say things, and so sometimes we put on the spot. What does it mean to us?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So the title of your talk is, American Jew versus Jewish American. So I remember reading once that the one who originally asked that question is like the father of Reform Judaism, Moses Mendelssohn. And he asked the same question, and he's from Germany, and he asked the question to his people out in Germany, like, what do you guys prefer? You guys an American a German Jew or a Jewish German? And his feelings were German Jew, but
Well, what he said is you can be a Jew in the home,
right,
but a mensch in the street.
Right, a mensch
in other
in the
words,
street.
which is kind of that gentleman I was mentioning. Like in your public life, don't advertise it.
Right.
You can be a German Jew,
yeah.
but in your private life,
But do you think nowadays, looking back, do you think he's rolling over in his grave to see what the reform, what the reform movement
that's
has today?
a complicated question. People blame Mendelssohn on
Other things?
reform movement.
Okay.
He was actually a traditional Jew who was under enormous pressures to convert. They promised him a very prominent spot in the philosophy department if he would convert, and he held out, and he didn't, and he was
Right, he
Shabbat and
seemed like
kosher.
more of like an Orthodox Jew.
But they
than a
say
Reform.
that attitude is what began the whole thing of, well, we're going to fit in, and then it's slippery slope, as some people are.
There's actually, someone told me a story of during World War I, there was British Jews fighting in the British Army to German Jews.
You mentioned that
You
before.
mentioned it.
Right, what if you have to
Yeah.
shoot at each other?
They were shooting each
Right,
other.
so
Right.
you say, you know,
Together.
I'm a Jewish American, I'm defending my country, but will I shoot at another Jew if they're in the other country? So that's also one of those flashpoints of.
Yeah, I think for me, that story answers the question.